Hey there, so today we're diving into something really interesting, how ancient biblical prophecies seem to be lining up with what's happening in the world today. You know, it's easy to get scared when we hear about things like the end times, but what if these events are actually here to prepare us, not scare us? Stick with me as we explore how these prophecies might be more relevant now than ever before. It's pretty wild, but also a reminder to stay informed and ready for whatever comes next. Let's get into it. Let's talk about something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately, current world events, particularly the tension between Israel and Iran. If you've been keeping up with the news, you probably know things are getting pretty heated. We've seen Israel and Iran clash over Iran's nuclear ambitions, and honestly, it's got a lot of people on edge. But what if I told you that all of this, the conflict, the alliances, and the rising tensions might not just be random events unfolding? What if it's actually part of something much bigger, something that's been predicted for thousands of years in the Bible? Yeah, I'm talking about prophecy. More specifically, Ezekiel 38. Now, before you start thinking this is some doom and gloom, this end of the world talk, just hear me out. Prophecy, especially the kind we find in the Bible, isn't meant to scare us. It's meant to prepare us. It's like getting a heads up on what's coming, so we're not caught off guard. And when we start to see these prophecies playing out in real time, like what's happening with Israel and Iran, it should give us a sense of clarity, not fear. It's kind of like seeing the storm clouds roll in. You don't panic, you just grab your umbrella, right? So let's take a look at this, because what we're seeing in the news today could very well be pointing to the fulfillment of something written long ago. Let's start with Israel and Iran. These two countries have a long, complicated history, to say the least. For years, Iran has made no secret of its disdain for Israel, even going so far as to openly threaten its existence. And Israel, understandably, has been on high alert about Iran's nuclear program, especially considering that Iran's leadership has been pretty vocal about wanting to destroy Israel. You can see why this would be a huge concern. Fast forward to recent events. The US and Israel have been working together to take action against Iran's nuclear facilities. In fact, Israel recently launched airstrikes on several of Iran's nuclear sites. The world is watching, and tensions are rising. But here's where it gets interesting. When we look at this situation through the lens of biblical prophecy, especially Ezekiel 38, we see that it might not be as unexpected as we think. You see, Ezekiel 38 talks about a future time when a group of nations will unite against Israel, and one of those key players is Persia, which we now know as Iran. In fact, Ezekiel 38 names Iran specifically as one of the nations that will join a coalition against Israel. Now, this isn't just some vague prediction. This is happening right before our eyes, as we watch Iran continue to build its nuclear capabilities and threaten Israel's existence. It's hard not to draw a connection between what we're seeing today and the prophecy that was written thousands of years ago. But here's the thing. Ezekiel 38 doesn't just talk about Iran. It talks about a coalition of nations that will come together to attack Israel. And guess who else is on that list? Russia. That's right, Russia is another key player in Ezekiel's prophecy. In recent years, we've seen Russia and Iran grow closer, forming military alliances and even cooperating on nuclear technology. This is significant because Ezekiel 38 doesn't just talk about any random nations. It specifically mentions a partnership between Persia, Iran, and Russia coming together in the last days to attack Israel. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why should I care about this? What does this mean for me? Well, the point of prophecy isn't to make us scared, it's to help us prepare. When we see these events happening in real time, it's not just a sign of the times, it's a wake-up call. Prophecy helps us understand the bigger picture, and it gives us a roadmap for what's coming next. We're not just living through random events, we're part of a bigger plan, and prophecy shows us that. It's kind of like watching a movie where you can predict what happens next because you've already read the script. The more you understand about the script, the less you're caught off guard by the plot twists. And this is where Ezekiel 38 becomes so important. It tells us that Iran and Russia will be part of this coalition that attacks Israel. And the crazy part is, this is happening now. We've already seen Russia and Iran start working together more closely. And as things escalate, it's only a matter of time before we see this prophecy come to life. But here's the best part. The prophecy doesn't stop there. It doesn't just say that Israel will be attacked. It says that God will intervene and defend Israel. In other words, no matter how intense things get, no matter how bleak it might seem, God has a plan. He's already got this all figured out. Ezekiel 38 reminds us that while nations might rise up against Israel, God will be the ultimate protector. That's why prophecy is so important. It's not there to make us anxious or scared. It's there to remind us that God is in control. And it's not just about the future. It's about how we respond to the present. When we see these things happening, it should stir us to action, to be prepared, to be alert, not in fear, but in faith. And here's something even more comforting. Ezekiel 38 is just one piece of the puzzle. The Bible has so many more prophecies that give us hope and assurance about what's to come. Prophecies that tell us that God will not only protect Israel, but will eventually bring about a new world order where peace will reign. It's a reminder that no matter how chaotic things might seem now, there's a bigger picture at play. The world events we're seeing today are just the beginning of something much greater, and prophecy shows us that in the end, God will have the victory. So, when we see the headlines about Israel and Iran, when we hear about Russia's involvement, and when we wonder what's next, we don't need to panic, and we just need to stay informed, stay prepared, and trust that God's plan is unfolding exactly as it should. These events aren't random, they're part of a larger narrative, and we can find peace knowing that God's got it all under control. So, as we continue to watch these things unfold, let's do so with a sense of confidence and peace, knowing that prophecy is not meant to scare us, but to prepare us. And when we understand that, we can face the future with faith, not fear. Isn't that a powerful thing to remember? So, recently, tensions between Israel and Iran have been at an all-time high, and it's no surprise given their history. But something significant happened, something that got the whole world talking. Israel, with the support of the US, carried out a military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. This wasn't just some minor operation, it was a major, bold move. The attack targeted 3 key nuclear sites in Iran: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, all of which were believed to be advancing Iran's nuclear weapons program. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, Iran has long been suspected of trying to develop nuclear capabilities, and that's been a huge point of contention between them, Israel, and the US. Israel, especially, has always seen Iran's nuclear ambitions as a direct threat to their existence. Iran's leadership has publicly declared their intention to wipe Israel off the map. So, this attack, although it wasn't a surprise to many, was a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict between the two nations. The US was involved too. While Israel has always been the one leading the charge when it comes to military actions against Iran, the United States was right there, backing Israel with support and military might. Now, Israel had been warning for years that Iran was getting closer and closer to developing a nuclear bomb. And once Iran began expanding its nuclear program and stockpiling uranium, Israel felt they couldn't sit back any longer. They had to act. So, what happened next? Well, the attack led to an immediate spike in global tension. The world watched as the news broke. This wasn't just another strike, this was a full-on military operation aimed at halting Iran's nuclear program before it could go any further. Of course, Iran didn't take this lightly. They condemned the strikes and vowed revenge, promising retaliation in whatever form necessary. Many expected the situation to spiral into something bigger, something far more dangerous. And while things didn't escalate into an all-out war right away, the attack certainly didn't bring peace to the region. In fact, it only made the tensions more palpable, and it made clear that the issue with Iran and Israel wasn't going to go away anytime soon. It was just a temporary setback for Iran, but the problem remained, simmering beneath the surface. Now, here's where things get really interesting. While many people were talking about how the attack might usher in a new era of peace in the Middle East, I was reminded of something important from the Bible. Specifically, Ezekiel 38. See, Ezekiel 38 talks about a future time when a group of nations, including Persia, what we know today as Iran, will join forces with other countries, most notably Russia, to come against Israel in the last days. And the thing is, this prophecy makes it clear that this coalition led by Iran, including Russia, is not something that happens once and then fades away. No. Ezekiel 38 says that these nations will come against Israel in the future, and it doesn't just say once, but repeatedly. It says that Persia, or Iran, will regroup, rearm, and come back stronger. And that's what makes this recent strike so fascinating. While some were hopeful that it might be a turning point, maybe the beginning of some lasting peace in the region, Ezekiel 38 tells us something different. It tells us that any peace we see, especially if it involves Iran, is temporary. Iran may be temporarily set back in their nuclear pursuits, but the prophecy is clear. Iran isn't done. They will rise again, they will rearm, and they will be back to continue their efforts against Israel, and they won't be alone. According to Ezekiel 38, Iran will join forces with other nations, particularly Russia, in a coalition of nations that will come against Israel in the future. Now, this is where the prophecy really starts to ring true when you look at current events. Over the past few years, we've seen a significant shift in the relationship between Russia and Iran. These two countries, who historically weren't aligned, have grown closer in recent years. They've worked together on military strategies, on arms deals, and even on nuclear cooperation. Russia has helped Iran in developing its nuclear program, despite international sanctions and warnings. And while the US and Israel are trying to stop Iran from achieving nuclear capabilities, Russia's involvement is making it harder to do so. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 talks about how Persia, or Iran, will rearm in the last days. And looking at what's happening now with Russia's support of Iran, it's pretty clear that this rearming is already in progress. Russia is helping Iran bypass sanctions, assisting with military advancements, and strengthening their nuclear program in ways that make it harder for the West to put a stop to it. And when we look at what Ezekiel 38 says about the alliance between Russia and Iran, it becomes clear that this is a big deal for Israel. It's not just a temporary setback or a small challenge. This alliance signals a more serious threat down the road, one that could be far more dangerous than any individual strike. The attack on Iran's nuclear sites may have slowed things down for now, but it didn't end the threat. In fact, it may have only made the situation worse. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 reminds us that Iran will eventually rearm, and when they do, they won't be alone. They will have the help of Russia and likely other nations as they move forward with their plans to come against Israel. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat it. It tells us that this coalition will be powerful, and it will pose a significant threat to Israel. But here's the important part. While the prophecy tells us that Israel will face great opposition, it also reminds us that God has a plan. Ezekiel 38 is not just about a coalition of nations coming against Israel. It's about God intervening to protect Israel. The prophecy goes on to tell us that God will step in, that he will defend his people, and that he will ensure victory for Israel. So while the attack on Iran's nuclear sites might seem like a victory for Israel in the short term, we know that this conflict isn't over. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 shows us that what's happening today is just one chapter in a much larger story. Israel may have scored a victory, but the battle is far from over. The peace we see now, while welcome, is temporary at best. But the good news is that God's plan is much bigger, and in the end, he will defend Israel and bring about his victory. So, as we watch the events unfold, it's important to keep in mind that these are the signs of the times. While there may be temporary setbacks or pauses in the action, the ultimate fulfillment of prophecy is still on the horizon. And as we see Iran rearming and growing closer to Russia, we can't forget that this is exactly what the Bible said would happen. It's not something to fear, but something to prepare for. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 is a reminder that God is in control, even when it feels like the world is spiraling. So, while the peace may be temporary, we can rest in the knowledge that God's plan is unfolding just as he said it would. If you've been following world politics, you might have noticed something pretty significant happening over the last few years, something that's worth paying attention to. Russia and Iran, two countries that historically weren't particularly close, have been growing much closer. And I mean closer in a way that goes beyond just trade or diplomatic talks. We're talking about deep military cooperation, shared military technology, and even nuclear collaboration. And this isn't just a coincidence. There's a bigger picture here, one that ties directly into biblical prophecy, particularly the prophecy found in Ezekiel 38. Now, when we think about Russia and Iran, we tend to focus on their roles in global politics today. Russia, as a powerful nation with significant military strength, has long been a key player on the world stage. And Iran, which has been increasingly assertive in the Middle East, has been pursuing nuclear capabilities, often in defiance of international agreements and sanctions. But in recent years, the relationship between these two countries has gone from distant allies to strategic partners, and that's raising some serious red flags. You see, Russia and Iran have been strengthening their military ties. Russia has been supplying Iran with advanced weaponry and military technology, which has allowed Iran to modernize and upgrade its military capabilities. This includes everything from fighter jets to air defense systems. One of the most notable pieces of military technology that Russia has provided Iran is the S-300 missile defense system. This is a highly advanced air defense system, and for years, Russia had been hesitant to sell it to Iran, mostly due to concerns over Western backlash. But in 2016, after years of negotiation, Russia finally delivered the S-300 system to Iran, and this wasn't just a one-time deal. Over the years, Russia has continued to sell arms and military technology to Iran. Further solidifying their military alliance, Russia has also been training Iranian military personnel, improving their strategic capabilities. This growing military cooperation is a sign of how deep their relationship has become. It's no longer just about trade or politics. It's about military strength and strategy, with both countries now working together on matters of defense and regional power. But it doesn't stop there. Russia and Iran's alliance goes beyond just military hardware. They've also been cooperating in the realm of energy, particularly in the nuclear field. Now, if you know anything about Iran's nuclear ambitions, you know that they've been a hot topic for years. Iran has been pursuing nuclear technology, and there's been constant tension between Iran and the West, especially the US. On over this issue, the international community, led by the US and European nations, has been trying to limit Iran's nuclear program through sanctions and diplomatic negotiations. But Russia has played a very different role. While the West has been trying to limit Iran's nuclear capabilities, Russia has been one of the few countries that has been actively supporting Iran's nuclear ambitions. Russia has helped Iran build nuclear reactors, and it's even provided assistance in the development of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. One of the key examples of this is the Bushehr nuclear power plant in Iran, which was built with Russian assistance. Russia not only helped build the plant, but it also provides Iran with fuel for the reactor. This partnership has allowed Iran to continue expanding its nuclear capabilities, despite international sanctions. And while Iran claims its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, many in the international community, including Israel, are highly skeptical of these claims. They see Iran's nuclear program as a potential path to developing nuclear weapons, which could dramatically shift the balance of power in the Middle East. And what's even more concerning is that Russia, rather than opposing Iran's nuclear ambitions, has actually been enabling them, and this is exactly what we're seeing today. Russia and Iran working together, helping each other achieve military and nuclear goals that would be nearly impossible to achieve alone. The question is, why are these two countries so eager to form this alliance? Well, it's clear that both countries have common enemies. Both Russia and Iran are facing pressure from the West, especially from the United States and its allies. Russia, with its territorial ambitions and its support of controversial governments in places like Syria, has been on the receiving end of economic sanctions and international condemnation. Iran, on the other hand, has been isolated by the international community for its nuclear ambitions and its support of militant groups in the Middle East. By coming together, Russia and Iran are able to bolster each other's position on the world stage. But there's an even bigger reason for this alliance, and this is where things get really interesting. As we look at what the Bible says about the end times, and specifically about the prophecy found in Ezekiel 38, it's almost as if what we're seeing today is playing out exactly as it was foretold. In Ezekiel 38, there's a prophecy about a coalition of nations that will come against Israel in the last days, and two of the main players in that coalition are Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and Russia. In fact, Ezekiel 38 specifically mentions that Persia, along with other nations, will form an alliance and come against Israel in what's known as the Gog and Magog prophecy. And when you look at what's happening today, this growing alliance between Russia and Iran, it's almost as if the prophecy is unfolding in real time. Iran, which is named as Persia in the Bible, is aligning itself with Russia, the very nation that Ezekiel 38 predicted would join forces with Iran in the last days. This alliance is not just a passing phase, it's a deep, strategic partnership that has the potential to significantly impact the Middle East and the world. And this is exactly what Ezekiel 38 predicted. It's no coincidence that Iran and Russia are growing closer, because the Bible specifically told us that these two nations would eventually come together to oppose Israel. So what's even more fascinating is that this prophecy isn't just about two nations coming together for the sake of political or economic interests. It's about something much bigger, something that will ultimately lead to a battle, a final showdown, in which God himself will intervene and defend Israel. Now, before you start thinking that this alliance between Russia and Iran is just a random occurrence, take a moment to step back and consider the bigger picture. Ezekiel 38 isn't just a prediction about the political alliances of today. It's a message to us that the events we're witnessing are part of a much bigger divine plan. The growing alliance between Russia and Iran is a sign that we're getting closer to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. It's a reminder that God's plan is unfolding exactly as he said it would. And while we can't predict exactly how everything will play out, we know that in the end, Israel will be protected, and God will bring victory over those who come against it. So, when we look at Russia and Iran's relationship today, it's not just about military trade or political maneuvering. It's about prophecy. It's about the nations that will come together against Israel in the last days, as foretold in Ezekiel 38. And while this alliance may seem like a concerning development, we can take comfort in the fact that God's plan is already in motion. The alliance between Russia and Iran is just one more piece of the puzzle, and it's a reminder that no matter what happens, God is in control. Alright, now we're diving into something really fascinating. Ezekiel 38, this chapter from the Bible, holds a significant prophecy about a future event that is said to involve a coalition of nations coming against Israel. This prophecy has been a topic of much discussion for centuries, and the more we look at the world around us, the more we see these nations forming exactly as described in Ezekiel 38. So let's break it down and explore exactly what's going on here. To understand Ezekiel 38, we first need to know a little bit about the context of the prophecy itself. Ezekiel was a prophet who lived during a time of great upheaval for Israel, when the nation had been exiled to Babylon. His writings are full of visions and prophecies, many of which deal with the fate of Israel and the surrounding nations. In chapter 38, Ezekiel prophesies about a time when a powerful group of nations will come together and launch an attack against Israel. The most striking thing about this prophecy is that it specifically names the nations that will form this coalition. And these names, when examined through the lens of modern-day geography, give us a roadmap of the nations that are involved. But here's the twist. It's not just a prophecy about a future attack on Israel. It's a prophecy that sets the stage for the ultimate battle at the end of days. So, when we look at Ezekiel 38, it's important to realize that this is not the final battle of Armageddon. No, this is something that comes before that. Something like a prelude, a military campaign that lays the groundwork for the ultimate showdown between good and evil. Now, let's get into the specifics. In Ezekiel 38, we see the prophet being told by God to set his face against a man named Gog, who is the leader of a land called Magog. This is where the prophecy gets its name, Gog and Magog. These names are often associated with an alliance of nations that will come together in the last days to attack Israel. But Gog and Magog aren't just random names. They're actually references to specific territories and rulers, and they play a crucial role in the prophecy. Gog is identified as the leader of Magog, and he is said to be the prince of the land. Now, when we look at ancient history and try to identify where Magog was located, most scholars agree that it points to the area of modern-day Russia. In fact, many believe that Magog refers to the region north of Israel, which is where Russia lies today. This is significant because Russia is one of the key players in Ezekiel 38, and the prophecy tells us that Gog, the leader of Magog, will gather a coalition of nations to come against Israel. So, right off the bat, we see that Russia plays a central role in this prophecy, but Russia is not alone. Alongside them, Ezekiel 38 mentions several other nations that will join in this alliance. And when we look at these nations, we can see that the prophecy is coming to life before our eyes. Let's take a look at the 6 nations that are mentioned in the prophecy and who they represent today. First, we have Persia, In the Bible, Persia refers to what we now call Iran. We've already discussed how Iran has become a major player in the Middle East, and we can see how their involvement in this prophecy lines up with what's happening today. Iran has been vocal in its desire to destroy Israel, and its nuclear ambitions make it a critical player in this coalition. In fact, Iran's alliance with Russia, which we've seen grow stronger over the years, is exactly what Ezekiel 38 predicted. So, we know that Iran, or Persia, will be part of this coalition. The next nation mentioned in Ezekiel 38 is Cush. Cush is often understood to refer to modern-day Ethiopia. In ancient times, the kingdom of Cush was located in the region south of Egypt, and it's believed that this is the area referred to in the prophecy. Ethiopia is a significant player in the Middle East and Africa, and its involvement in this coalition points to the growing alliances between African nations and the powers in the Middle East. Alongside Ethiopia, we also see the mention of Put is generally believed to refer to modern-day Libya. In biblical times, Libya was located to the west of Egypt, and its involvement in this coalition suggests that North African nations will play a role in the events leading up to the final battle. Now, we have to understand that the alliances in Ezekiel 38 are not just about politics. They're about power and influence. These nations are not randomly choosing sides. They are coming together because they have a shared agenda, one that is rooted in their hatred for Israel. But the prophecy doesn't stop there. It also mentions Gomer and Beth Togarmah. These two regions are often associated with the peoples of Eastern Europe, particularly Germany and Turkey. Gomer is thought to represent the area that is now modern-day Turkey, while Beth Togarmah is associated with Armenia and some parts of Central Asia. These nations, particularly Turkey, have played a significant role in Middle Eastern politics for centuries. Turkey's position as a bridge between Europe and the Middle East makes it a critical player in the geopolitics of the region. As for Gomer, it is often identified with the area of modern-day Germany. So, we can see that the prophecy involves a mix of nations from all over the region, nations that have historically been powerful, and nations that have become powerful in more recent years. But here's the thing about Ezekiel 38. This coalition of nations is not just a group of countries coming together for no reason. They're coming together because they have a common goal, and that goal is to attack Israel. Now, when we read Ezekiel 38, it's important to remember that this is not the final battle. It's not Armageddon. Armageddon is the final cataclysmic battle between the forces of good and evil, and it takes place at the end of the tribulation period. But Ezekiel 38 is different. This is a military campaign that happens earlier on, possibly even before the start of the tribulation period. It's like the opening act of the final battle. But don't make the mistake of thinking that this isn't significant, because it is. The alliance of nations described in Ezekiel 38 is a precursor to the larger battle that will take place in Armageddon. It's the beginning of the end, and it sets the stage for what's to come. The prophecy tells us that Israel will be caught off guard by this attack. They will be living in peace, thinking that they are safe, when suddenly this massive coalition of nations will come against them. But here's the thing, the prophecy doesn't just leave us with a bleak picture of doom. It tells us that God will intervene, He will protect Israel, and He will defeat the attacking forces. In fact, God says in Ezekiel 38 that He will bring judgment on the nations that come against Israel. He will strike them down, and He will show the world that He is the true God. This is a powerful reminder that no matter how bad things get, God is still in control. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, God will step in and protect His people. So, when we look at Ezekiel 38 and the nations that are involved, it's clear that we're seeing the fulfillment of prophecy in our own time. We're watching as Russia and Iran, along with other nations, are aligning themselves against Israel. And while this may not be the final battle, it's a sign that the clock is ticking, and the events leading up to the return of Christ are unfolding right before our eyes. But here's the thing, it's not about fear, it's about being prepared. Ezekiel 38 is a reminder that the world is not spiraling out of control, it's all part of God's plan. And when we understand that, we can face the future with confidence, knowing that no matter what happens, God will always protect His people. So as we watch these nations come together, we don't need to panic. We just need to be aware, stay informed, and trust in God's plan. The prophecy of Ezekiel 38 is a powerful reminder that God is sovereign and He will have the final word. As we dive deeper into Ezekiel 38, there's an interesting aspect of the prophecy that can't be ignored: the reactions of other nations to the coalition coming against Israel. These reactions are crucial because they provide insight into how the world at large will respond to such a significant event. While the prophecy speaks of a coalition of nations attacking Israel, it also mentions a few countries that raise their voices in protest, questioning the reasons behind this attack. Two nations that come up in this context are Saudi Arabia and England. Saudi Arabia, in particular, has had a complex relationship with Israel. Though they are not formal allies, there have been signs in recent years of an informal relationship, primarily driven by shared concerns over Iran's growing influence in the region. This is important because Ezekiel 38 tells us that nations like Sheba and Dedan will question the coalition attacking Israel, and most scholars agree that Sheba and Dedan refer to modern-day Saudi Arabia. In the prophecy, these nations ask the attacking forces, "Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty?" This is an interesting question because it indicates a certain skepticism or disapproval from these nations. In the context of the prophecy, Saudi Arabia, despite its history of opposing Israel, appears to be questioning the actions of the coalition rather than joining in. Why would Saudi Arabia question this attack? Well, it could be because Saudi Arabia, despite its cautious stance toward Israel, is still a major player in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia has historically led the charge in Arab politics, and it's possible that they may be hesitant to openly support a war against Israel, especially given the delicate balance they've maintained in recent years. We've already seen the thawing of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, particularly over their shared concerns about Iran's ambitions. This cautious cooperation between the two nations could make it more likely that Saudi Arabia would voice concern over the coalition's actions rather than supporting them. But what about England? In Ezekiel 38, we also read about the merchants of Tarshish, along with their young lions, who questioned the coalition's motives. Many believe that Tarshish refers to ancient Britain, and the young lions are a reference to nations that were once part of the British Empire, such as the United States and Canada. And this is fascinating because England, like Saudi Arabia, has a complicated history with Israel. On one hand, Britain played a pivotal role in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. On the other hand, Britain has also been critical of Israeli policies, particularly when it comes to the ongoing conflict with Palestinians. So, in Ezekiel 38, when the merchants of Tarshish raise questions about the attack on Israel, it seems to reflect England's historically cautious and sometimes critical stance toward Israel. While England is not likely to directly intervene in the conflict, their questioning could signal a moral or political disapproval of the coalition's actions. So, in this context, Saudi Arabia and England are both nations that, while not actively engaging in the attack, question the motives of the nations involved. But there's another important aspect of Ezekiel 38, nations that are notably absent from this prophecy. When we read about the coalition attacking Israel, it's curious that certain countries that we might expect to be involved are not mentioned at all. Two of the most notable absences are Egypt and Syria. Egypt, in particular, is a significant omission. For years, Egypt has been one of the most important players in Middle Eastern politics, and its history with Israel is well documented. Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty in 1979, making Egypt the first Arab country to officially recognize Israel. Since then, Egypt and Israel have maintained a relatively stable relationship, despite occasional tensions. The fact that Egypt is absent from the coalition described in Ezekiel 38 is intriguing, especially given its geographic proximity to Israel. It's possible that Egypt's peace agreement with Israel plays a key role in its absence. Despite the ongoing challenges in the Middle East, Egypt has continued to honor this peace agreement, which has led to some stability in the region. So, when we look at the prophecy, it's interesting to think that Egypt could be neutral, or perhaps even unwilling to join any coalition that seeks to attack Israel. Their absence could be a reflection of the long-standing peace that exists between the two countries. But there's another possible reason why Egypt might not be involved in this coalition. Egypt, like many countries in the region, has its own set of internal challenges. Political instability, economic struggles, and the growing influence of radical groups could make it more difficult for Egypt to take an active role in any large-scale military conflict. With so many issues to address within their own borders, it's possible that Egypt will simply be unable to participate in the kind of alliance described in Ezekiel 38. Another country that's notably absent from the prophecy is Syria. For decades, Syria has been one of Israel's most vocal and aggressive enemies. The two countries have fought several wars, and Syria has been a key player in anti-Israeli coalitions in the past. However, in Ezekiel 38, Syria is nowhere to be found. This is particularly interesting given that Syria shares a long border with Israel and has historically been one of its main adversaries. Why is Syria missing from this prophecy? One possible explanation could be the current state of Syria. Since 2011, Syria has been embroiled in a brutal civil war, and the country has been deeply divided. The ongoing conflict has left Syria in a weakened state, with various factions vying for control of the country. It's possible that by the time the events of Ezekiel 38 unfold, Syria will be so internally divided or weakened that it won't be able to take part in the conflict. The Bible even mentions that the city of Damascus will be completely destroyed in the end times, Isaiah 17:1. Could this be a reference to the ongoing devastation in Syria? It's certainly possible. Syria's absence from the prophecy could be a reflection of its current instability and the fact that it may not be in a position to join any military coalition against Israel. Lastly, let's consider Jordan, another neighboring country that has a peace agreement with Israel. Since 1994, Jordan has maintained a relatively peaceful relationship with Israel, and while the relationship has had its ups and downs, it's generally been stable. Given this, it's not surprising that Jordan is also absent from the coalition in Ezekiel 38. Jordan's peace treaty with Israel may be a factor in their absence, as they are unlikely to participate in a military attack on Israel given their peaceful ties. So, when we look at the prophecy of Ezekiel 38, we see a fascinating scenario unfolding. On the one hand, we have nations like Saudi Arabia and England, which raise questions about the coalition's motives. They are not directly involved in the attack, but their questioning suggests that they are reluctant to take sides in this conflict. On the other hand, we have countries like Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, which are conspicuously absent from the prophecy. Their absence could indicate a shift in the political landscape of the Middle East, one where Israel has successfully forged peace with certain nations, or where other countries are distracted by internal struggles. Regardless of the reasons, the absence of these nations is an intriguing part of the prophecy, and it adds another layer of complexity to the unfolding scenario. As we watch the events of the world unfold, it's clear that the situation in the Middle East is always in flux. The political alliances are shifting, and the dynamics between Israel and its neighbors are constantly changing. And while we can't predict the future with certainty, the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 gives us a glimpse into what may be coming. It reminds us that no matter how the nations react, God is ultimately in control, and His plan will come to fruition. As we wrap up, remember this: no matter how chaotic the world around us may seem, there's hope. The signs we're seeing in the world today, the alliances being formed, and the prophecies coming to life are not meant to scare us. They're meant to prepare us to stay grounded in our faith and trust in the certainty of what's to come. The Bible tells us that when we see these things begin to unfold, we are to look up to the sky in hope, knowing that our redemption is drawing near. Christ is coming again, and that's the greatest hope we have. So let's stay informed, stay prepared, and hold on to the hope that we are part of God's plan. We don't know exactly when He will return, but we do know it's closer than ever. Keep your eyes on the horizon, keep your heart open, and be ready. And hey, if you've enjoyed this content and want to stay up to date on more discussions like this, consider liking and subscribing. We're in this journey together, and there's a lot more to explore. Thanks for being here, and keep looking up.